Congressman John Peter Spiros Sarbanes has served in Congress since 2007, when he was elected to represent Maryland's 3rd District. He and his wife of 25 years, Dina, have 3 children, Stephanie, Nico, and Leo.
So what the Greeks did in 1940, in October 1940, was remarkable. It was a real act of courage standing up to the Axis powers as they did. But it's worth thinking about what made them do it. Why did they do it? What was it in the Greek character that inspired them to take such a courageous stand? And for that, I think you go back to 490 BC, the Battle of Marathon, where the Athenians stood up to the invading Persians. And in the wake of that victory over the Persians, I think you had this allegiance developed to democracy and democratic traditions that became embedded in the Greek character. So when you get to 1940 and a legacy of this commitment to liberty and democratic traditions, while what the Greeks did in 1940 was courageous, inspiring, historically noteworthy, it was in no way surprising if you think about this tested character of the Greek people. When they turn to Mussolini and in response to his ultimatum, they say, "Oichi, we will not surrender." Very inspirational. I think also if you look at the Greeks of today, you look at modern Greece and what it's facing, the challenges that it's facing, that again you're seeing Greece overcome adversity. You're seeing the Greek people reach inside of themselves into this strong character and say, we will not surrender to economic and political instability. We will overcome that. So in a sense, it's in the tradition of Oichi Day that modern day Greece is greeting this challenge that faces it, and I think will overcome it. And I think when we get generations out and we look back on the 2010s in Greece, in modern Greece, we'll say they overcame adversity in the same way that the Greeks in 1940, the Greek people in 1940 overcame adversity, faced long odds, and said to Mussolini and the Axis powers, Oichi. That's really what Oichi Day stands for. And it's an inspiration not just to the Greek people, but to people everywhere who seek freedom, cherish liberty, and cherish democracy.
John was born and raised in Baltimore and spent summers on Maryland's Eastern Shore, where his immigrant parents, Spiros and Martina Sarbanes, owned and operated the Mayflower Grill restaurant. A graduate of Princeton University and Harvard Law School, John spent a year studying law and politics in Greece as a Fulbright scholar.
Well, think about Greece. I mean, Greece today is a very, very tiny country. Think about the Greece of 1940, a very small country, in sort of a very strategic location. And here comes Mussolini and Italy and the Axis powers and all that stood behind them. It's remarkable that the Greek people had this kind of collective, spontaneous response to that challenge, that threat, that intimidation, that ultimatum, given, as you say, this sort of David and Goliath comparison between Greece and the Axis powers. So Greece, in standing up, not only was calling on its own character, the Greek people, in responding to this challenge, but what an inspiration it was to others who were going to stand up to the Nazi scourge in World War II. And many historians, of course, look at that as a key turning point in the challenge, the response to the Axis powers. So we're right to celebrate and commemorate Oichi Day, both because of what the Greeks did and also what it meant kind of historically in terms of the way World War II evolved from there. So it certainly was David standing up to Goliath in a very inspirational way.
Since coming to Congress, John has been recognized for his work to promote public service and has authored legislation to create a Veterans Corps and to earn loan forgiveness for those who want to pursue careers in the government and nonprofit sectors. John has reached out to Greek Americans throughout the United States, asking them to embrace Hellenism in the public service by giving back to the broader American society.
Well, I'm certain that it sort of brought them up short a little bit, because it would never have occurred to them that Greece would be a problem, because Greece was so small and in their minds, I'm sure, inconsequential in the larger ambitions that they had for their sort of designs on power and domination. So you can imagine them being confounded first by the fact that the Greeks would respond by saying oichi, like, where does that come from, But secondly, that such a spirited resistance was undertaken by the Greek people. A resistance that's been acknowledged by many, by historians, by those of the day. So it certainly threw a monkey wrench into their well-laid plans, and as we know, may have affected the outcome of things going forward from that point.
A champion of the Chesapeake Bay and America's other natural treasures, John is the House sponsor of the No Child Left Inside Act, which would promote outdoor learning and environmental awareness for our children. The NCLI Act is supported by a coalition of nearly 2,000 national, regional, and local organizations representing more than 40 million Americans. On November 2, 2009, Congressman Sarbanes and the NCLI Coalition presented His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew with the certificate recognizing him for his outstanding efforts at promoting the cause of the environment.
Well, the women of Crete, stood up at a time when there was sort of a vacuum in terms of what the response would be, and all of the kind of historical data we have and the anecdotal accounts, or that they fought as bravely as any man would have fought or did fight at that time. And so the Greek people, and I think peoples more broadly, those who cherish freedom, owe a great debt to the women of Crete for how they stood up as fiercely as you would have expected of anyone. And that's part of the proud tradition of Greece's response to these threats, this intimidation, this invasion of its land and of the island of Crete. And so it's part of that legacy that we take away as we celebrate and commemorate this, this courageous stand.
John currently serves the Energy and Commerce Committee, where he brings a special focus to the issues of healthcare and consumer protection. He has authored legislation to expand the supply of physicians and other critical caregivers at a time when the country faces severe shortages, particularly in the field of primary care.
Well, of course, you're being invaded from the sky. And again, how do you respond? For many, that would have caused a paralyzing fear, but not for the Greeks. Again, they called on something, they drew on something in the depths of their character. By that time in their history, the devotion to freedom and liberty was so powerful that the instinctive response was to defend your home, to defend your island, to defend your country, whatever the threat, however intimidating the threat might be. And so that particular incident is just another in a litany of responses that the Greek people had to these threats, which I think certainly makes me as a Greek American very proud, but is something that people of all nations who cherish freedom and liberty and democratic principles can look to be inspired.
As a principal sponsor of Government by the People Act, Congressman Sarbanes is leading an effort to push back on the influence of big money in our politics. He is dedicated to restoring the voice of everyday Americans who increasingly feel that their priorities are being ignored by the Washington establishment. His legislation would allow candidates to fund their campaigns with a combination of grassroots donations and public matching funds, thereby breaking lawmakers' dependency on political action committees and other big money interests.
I think that the example of the Greeks standing up to Hitler, to Mussolini, to the Axis powers, and doing so against such long odds is really inspirational. Not just to modern-day Greeks who now are faced with overcoming economic and political adversity in their country today, and I think they will prevail because I think it's part of their character to prevail. But to peoples everywhere who cherish freedom and liberty and strive for self-determination, to stand up to whatever pressures or threats or odds come at them, to undermine that commitment that they have, to look back on the experience of the Greeks, the example of the Greeks in October of 1940 is a powerful source of inspiration. There are many others in the history of our world and of civilization that one can look to, but certainly among those are what the Greeks did when they said oichi to Mussolini and to the Nazi scourge. And so I think it's very fitting that we look back to that example of the Greeks as a way of inspiring others today who may be involved in similar struggles. And it's certainly, that example shouldn't be limited to just sort of a military setting. Any significant challenge that you face as an individual, but I think more importantly in this instance as sort of a collective, because it was the Greek people as a collective that were sort of spontaneously responding to this threat. When people come together and meet a threat, an intimidation, and do so against great odds, which is really what the legacy of Oichi Day is about, that's a very powerful thing. I think that's why we remember that day and we celebrate that day and we invite others to learn about it and understand it and to gain their own inspiration from it.
In Congress, John is a leading voice for the Greek American community. He has risen on numerous occasions in the chamber of the House of Representatives to advocate for the removal of Turkish troops from Cyprus and for the recognition and protection of human rights and religious freedoms of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. He sponsored resolutions in support of Greece's right to preserve its history and territory in its dispute from FYROM and regarding Greece's rights in the Aegean Sea.